Hello, welcome to the 45th episode of the Unifying Force. I'm Kat, joined by Gio and Dave. How is everybody?
Hey,
Good, thanks. Yeah.
doing well.
We are here today in a pre-recorded episode on May 25th, 2023, the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, 46th anniversary of Star Wars, and 5th anniversary of Solo.
Dear Ron Howard, Solo 2, right there.
Make it happen. Donald Glover's on it as well. Donald Glover wants to do it. And Disney Plus could be on
it too. So what's going on in Star Wars land for everybody?
Well, I mean, it's been a while since we had a new show based on what's going on. I think our last show is we were talking about Celebration recap.
Mm-hmm.
It has been so long since Celebration, and I know I wasn't there. Gio was there, but it doesn't feel like it's been that amount of time. It feels still very fresh. For the 40th last night, they dropped a full HD version of the Return of the Jedi panel from Celebration. I think we'll be watching that one of these days. And
there's just watch along.
Yeah, there's just so much stuff that it feels like really happening with it. But anniversaries today, the 3 anniversaries, there'll be special stuff. Jedi back in theaters was great. I loved that.
Right.
Yes, saw
that. You guys
that.
Both get to see it.
That was the first original trilogy film I've seen in a theater, and it was amazing. If it was at my local theater, I would have seen it more times.
Yes, right. I had to go kind of to like a sketchy theater, a town over, and watch it, but it was still amazing. I had seen that one before in theaters, but I had not seen that in theaters since I was like 6 years old. So very nostalgic. So that is the first movie, the first theater movie that I remember seeing ever in my life in theater. So it was a good show. Now, don't get me started on the fact that it was the special edition,
and the fact that it made over 5 million, like 6 million or so, is further proof that they would make money if they put these types of classic movies out for little limited runs like that more often.
Well, and I love that we have another theater, the nicer theater that's another town over from us, the town the other way, that they do little like theater rewind or something. They call it something like Raiders is going to be in theaters for like 2 or 3 days in the summer in July. And then Dirty Dancing is going to be back on. They're going to put that up on the big screen. And because they gave us previews, I went to see Guardians this past weekend, and they gave us previews for those rewind movies that are going to be out. I think they're putting Jaws back in theaters later this summer. So
that should be in theaters every summer.
If you did that at a larger release instead of these boutique theaters.
Yeah, I'm seeing The Life Aquatic again in theaters on Saturday night. I remember seeing that on opening day, Christmas. It was great.
Oh, nice. That's a fantastically quirky film. I would love to see that sort of storytelling somewhere on a Disney Plus show.
And I mean, we've seen that this kind of content is having cult films or films with a following can continue to make you money and have an audience, because I mean, Rocky Horror has been playing like every Saturday night at midnight since it came out.
It has the record of, in the United States, it's the longest continuously running film ever. It has been playing in a theater at least once a week since 1975. But the longest ever is actually a film, I believe it's somewhere in Africa, that's been playing literally every day at the same time since it came out in close to 50 years ago. I can't remember what it is, but it's something else that's got the record. But yeah, movies like this would have a continuously successful run if they put them out more often. Like when the pandemic happened and drive-in theaters took off again, the drive-in closest to me in Sacramento was the most profitable across the whole country. And they put all sorts of stuff out: Goonies, Gremlins, Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade, and Beetlejuice, Nightmare Before Christmas, Tenet. And it's like, man, everything was just rolling out, and it was really fun. So
Yeah, because
like, get on that.
it hits every demographic, and it's really easy to just print money that way. Because you've got the classics, you've got the cult classics that people talk about by word of mouth. For example, in central London, there's one brand of cinema called the Everyman, which is kind of like the slightly more independent chain. It's essentially, it was a couple of independent cinemas and they united, but they're not really like a corporation. It's very like anti-big corporate, big money. And they renovate listed buildings. So in the UK, listed buildings are protected because they have some historical or aesthetic value. Usually they are pre-World War II, but some of them go back way to like, ancient Londinium by the Romans. And the foundations are kept together. And it just reminds me that you could keep the foundations of cinema going really well if you do these re-releases in a strategic way, because the COVID pandemic has really knocked everyone. And I still think we're recovering personally and collectively. And definitely these companies with some of these crazy decisions that we could get into and talk at length. Warner Brothers Discovery, doing these write-offs of things. Bring back the old content, don't delete it and remove it from us as users or people who are fans. It's lucky that I think a lot of us have physical media still, but not everyone is so fortunate. Not everyone has that access.
Yeah.
Catherine is behind you, I think. Catherine, is there?
There's just a little bit of that. Is my wall like that has moved downstairs to a kind of makeshift theater room I made in a windowless room in my basement.
Wow.
That I've got, the classics are over there on VHS, is the despecialized or the before the specialized editions of the original trilogy, and a new movie that's coming out, my VHS of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, all of those things.
I have yet to still see the collection. They used to air them on BBC Two on Saturday and Sunday mornings at this really dead time. So well after So children's BBC used to be the only kids programming and cartoons from like the 60s until the late 80s. And in the 90s, they had Marvel Action Hour, and they showed a bit of the old Spider-Man and the old Hulk.
I know that the DVD sets of Young Indiana Jones are still available.
Okay, I'll look into that.
They're unlikely to ever get upgraded to HD because they were shot on 4 to 3 Sonic means it's not really that possible to do a proper HD transfer anyway. So, but they're still out there, and they're all available for free on various YouTube channels in lower res. But
I'll definitely look into that. How many did they make in the end?
I can't remember because they eventually went back and edited them all to take 2 episodes and turn them into 90-minute movies and stuff, or 2-hour movies.
That's how they aired in the UK on the BBC at this kind of dead 11 a.m. on a Sunday.
Results because you'd have 2 episodes that don't really necessarily have much in common, and they just kind of edit it together as like a 2-hour.
Yeah, because they were really, really theme specific, as I recall, as most of them is. This one is happening, and they happen all over the world. Right. The later teenage years, he's in Belgium and he's fighting in the war. And then before, when he's younger, he's in various parts of America. Yeah. But anyway, we digressed a lot. But we're talking about these various properties and things that are going on because, here there's in the Hollywood system, there's a big kind of news beat that we would be remiss if we didn't hit, which is the giant writer strike that may affect a lot of content that we have going on because, how long does this go and how much does it push back the Star Wars content that we've talked about and mentioned that we were going to, be discussing as we go on. I think we discussed this before the show that Ahsoka is probably safe. We're getting ready here on the channel, on the VCN, to do a whole summer crossover with all of our shows, our watch-alongs and Rebels Revisited and the Jedi Archives and our own show to prepare for Ahsoka, the Disney Plus show that's supposed to air at the end of August. And I hope that still happens. But beyond that, for the other Star Wars content that we're thinking is the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew and some of those other things, even the
Andor season 2.
Andor season 2.
I think all of those shows
season 4.
I think all those seasons you just mentioned were filming in London at the time.
So I mean, we're getting prepared for some delays and some things that are going to go down the pike. I think it'll even get to the movie slate that was announced at Celebration. Is, you know, we were promised those 3 Star Wars movies, and they're in the stages where those can't be fully written or whatever, and pushing back our content. But, you know, in my personal opinion, pushing back our content, not without reason.
Yeah, it's very justified. I think it's going to take a lot of understanding from everybody, from fans, from cast, from crew, from marketing execs. Can you believe it? If they have such empathy, because we know some of the producers and the people who carry the purse strings of some of these huge corporations, because there's been such monopolization and consolidation of the film and TV and movie industries. It makes it very difficult to get things done, and to, unfortunately, have even people who are the creatives who give us everything, the writers, to have a fair wage or salary. I think it's ridiculous how there's anyone close to the minimum wage working in these kind of jobs, but also just generally across the board around America and around the world. But this is the way things are going, unfortunately. So that's why we do like Star Wars, because we like to see the positive side of things. And there's always balance between dark and light. And that's partly how this show had its genesis.
Absolutely. And you know, I love to see, and we've seen so many times when we have guests on that are in the film industry that not on this show but on other shows, that you know, the creators right now are Star Wars fans. The creators, the actors, the people making this are the fans, and sure, they want to do it for the passion, but let them be able to have their passion and make that good content and be able to live a, you know, a reasonably comfortable life. Is you know,
that's something that's kind of permeating throughout all of the industries. Like, you'll see that all the studios will arbitrarily put out a piece of content just to avoid the copyright, them losing the copyright on it, even if it would be better if it just went back to the creator, who probably has better ideas, but they don't want to pay the original creators anymore. So they'll just churn out mediocrity to keep the, you know, to arbitrarily extend the copyright, which is how DC is
Disney.
Yeah, which is how DC has held on to the copyright for Watchmen since '87 and against the original deal that they had. And so, and other things like that, like when they keep, every once in a while, Disney will put out like a new Mickey Mouse short-lived TV series or Disney Plus show to keep that going, because their copyright thing's getting soon to expire. And so that's, and same thing over at, you know, like with Marvel Comics, and you have the actual comics division, the creators not getting paid enough and not getting their work respected and having to fight for creators' rights and stuff like that. So that's kind of all systemic, and maybe the writer's strike also needs to happen because you just need to improve the quality of, you know, because they're so cheap that they're not hiring good writers. And now on top of that, the entire industry's gone on strike. And we've seen how bad writing has been hurting Star Wars for the last few years. So it's like, yes, pay your writers and hire good writers and respect them in the same way that you do your producers and your other bigwigs who aren't as valuable as the writers, because everything starts with the writing. That is just as fundamental as any of the other facets in a production. So it seems like a no-brainer, but they haven't figured that out yet.
It's weird. There's this entire crunch going on everywhere, and you hear the term crunch being used for office jobs. And then in terms of pop culture and fun watching stuff, you hear it in terms of video games a lot with the coders and the programmers and the quality assurance testers. But for all those roles that are digital and computing and to do with editing in a digital sense, you have so much of that in Marvel, in Star Wars, and DC, and even in regular things that might just be like, for example, Netflix, All Quiet on the Western Front. Credits for that are gigantic because there's so many CG artists from around the world, and people aren't getting paid fairly for their labor across the board, like refuse collectors, teachers, nurses, doctors. So it's kind of insane how this is such a huge issue. And obviously the world is recovering from the pandemic, and there's cost of living issues, and inflation's out of control. And it's a bit of a shame that it might sound a bit selfish and entitled and babyish, but sometimes we want our Star Wars for escapism. And if Ahsoka is a little delayed, and Skeleton Crew is paused, and Andor Season 2 is suspended until next year. It'll be difficult and it'll be sad, but there's always things we can still talk about. And we can reminisce about the good times, the bad times, and also we can do some crazy speculation as well.
Absolutely.
So
and that's
there's a
some
lot
of the
to still
things
talk about.
that I like how you brought it in, because that's what a lot of this show is going to be about today, is really wrapping up the content and the stuff that we've seen in the first part of the year. We're going to wrap up a discussion of Mando Season 3. We never finished that here. We're going to talk about the Bad Batch and some of the we're beyond the spoilers point, people. If you are watching this and you haven't seen Mando Season 3 and you haven't seen Bad Batch, what have you been doing?
Yeah, watch that before it gets taken off.
But yeah, snap that up and go watch Willow tonight. This will air after. Never mind. But
I still might try. I haven't caught it at all, and I think I should.
Yeah, but we want to talk about those, and then later on, as the summer progresses, we'll be getting into some more previews and speculation on what we think is going to happen based on these things in the Ahsoka show, and based on, things we've talked about on the show before about Mortis and the world between worlds and how all that stuff is going to go in. But let's go. Let's start. Who wants to start with wrap-ups on Mando Season 3? Is how do you think it ended up, and how does it set us up for 4? And was it satisfying? What do you think?
Who wants to go?
I liked the penultimate episode. I did not like the actual finale. Taken at face value, they've followed the age-old Star Wars tradition of let's invent a really cool villain and let's not use him and just kill him off really quickly. Because Moff Gideon showed up at the end of Season 1, didn't see him again till the end of Season 2, and everybody knew he was going to break out and be back. They talked about him a lot in Season 3 or for bits, and then when he finally shows up again, let's kill him off and let's have him destroy the Darksaber. And then have eagle-eyed fans point out that there was a mural about before predicting this very event back in Rebels Season 4, which seems to confirm that it wasn't a fake out and it wasn't a clone. It was actually him, and they're just done. And
I didn't know this at all.
Yeah, there's a mural on the wall in the cave on the fall leading to the world between, in the episode where they follow the Loth Wolves across the planet. Okay. And there's a mural showing Grogu holding up his hands like this, and you see who has to be Gideon, who has the cape and everything with the Mandalorian helmet with the spikes on the head, with all these lines around it signifying like he's on fire, like being blown to bits. And it's too specific to be a coincidence. And to think that they were planning those basic plot beats that many years in advance, yet the season as a whole was filled with so much empty filler, just boggles the mind. And it's such a waste of potential. I think all the fan theories about the armor would have made for a much better finale and much more exciting, more plot twists. I thought Paz Vizsla's sacrifice was pointless. It's like he could have just ran back in the door. They could have just waited for the other guys to barge down the door, and he would have had like 30 Mandalorians fighting along with him. There's like literally no reason for him to stand there and just hold them off. I was like, you killed arguably the best character amongst that clan, who had an entitlement to the saber, which would have gone maybe in an interesting direction. And I don't know, maybe the demise of the Darksaber is meant to signify that now Mandalore is coming together, because you have those with the helmets on and those without, and they're all standing side by side and kumbaya by the forge. But other absurdities don't work, like the idea that you had those stragglers of Mandalorians on the planet literally within a few miles of the Imperial base, and they didn't know it was there. And I could go on. It's just not... It's, again, not good writing, and the whole season just didn't... It felt rushed, and I think this is a symptom of the Book of Boba Fett being... Because I still buy the conspiracy theory that the Book of Boba Fett was pushed on them. It interrupted the schedule for Mandalorian Season 3, because if they didn't have to do the Book of Boba Fett, you can bet that Season 3 would have been out last year, if not a year and a half ago, rather than, all the way up to this year. And it just felt like the writing on both those shows was compromised by rush productions because of studio mandates, as opposed to what they may have wanted to do. Like, I don't think that in its final form, Season 3 is not the Season 3 that Giancarlo Esposito spoke of way back in September 2020 when he said they'd already written through 4 seasons. Yeah. Which, why would he know that or have reason to be briefed on that if he wasn't even going to be in Season 4? But now it seems like they're just totally done with that character.
Okay, so let me stop you right there, and I'll interrupt. And I know that you have more to say later. He's not dead. I don't buy it. That was a clone.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so too.
That's where I'm at, and I'm hoping that concept that there saves a little bit of the writing. But I'm going to agree with a lot of what you just said, which is
But
this whole thing felt rushed because of the the 8 episode arc. Like the whole thing where they're sailing on the giant Mandalorian sail barge deal across the planet of Mandalore and this giant monster. That could have been 2 episodes on its own. Getting to the new Imperial base is we want to know so much more about those characters. Like I until the end, the Paz Vizsla's death. Yes, we saw it coming as soon as he's like, they shut the door and he's out there and he's going, I'm like, he's dead. He's gone. It's over. So that was the twist. But at the end, when he kills them all, he's there. He gets rid of all of these Mandalorian troopers and he stands back up. I'm screaming he lives. Then the other dudes come out and I'm like, oh no. But yeah, is his death seemed really, really meaningless. How easily Din dispatched those same guys in the next episode. The penultimate, you're right. The episode before the finale, so much better of an episode than the finale itself. But yeah, I don't buy that Gideon's dead. I think that's why Giancarlo knows, and I'm hoping we get some more, and it's going to continue down that road that I think ultimately leads to a better explanation of how somehow Palpatine returned.
The thing that gets to me about that is I think somehow Palpatine returned is tied into Operation Necromancy, which was mentioned by the Imperial, the Shadow Council at the beginning of the penultimate episode, which Gideon has been, co-opting for his own purposes, which was cloning himself ad nauseum. But which I was really surprised by, that the revelation that he's not so much a neo-imperialist as he is an opportunist and an egotist who just wants to be the next great warrior and all that. And I thought, wow, if the Mandalorians don't put him down, Thrawn will. Because they even mentioned Thrawn in the episode, so it's like, ooh, they might be leading into a great storyline. But the thing that gets me, and doubting that it might have been a clone as much as I would have wanted it to be, is the very last scene where Din and Grogu are camping out on Navarro, and they do the little circle zoom in thing, almost like it's an epilogue showing that we're done here. We've cleaned the slate. The Mandalorians are back, and here we go. We're going to start over with whatever new story we want to tell. And the fact that they had that whole subplot about the pirates because, oh, well, one of the characters is going to be the villain in Skeleton Crew. I'm like, okay, but that character didn't have a character arc in season 3. He's just a sleazy pirate at the beginning, and he's a sleazy pirate at the end. So it doesn't really mean anything.
Well, that's another one that I think that whole deal, that sub story was killed by the little 8 episode. It's because that was it was huge. It was
dramatic,
like theater movie quality action going on.
We had actual dogfights in the Mandalorian. Yeah,
that should have been 2 or 3 episodes.
It felt like 2 seasons squashed into one, but it was like a very random patchwork of things that was stitched together that didn't really feel congruent. It didn't feel like it's almost as if you imagine like a mosaic or something, but you're looking at a mosaic and from far it looks great, and you get up close and you realize all the tiles are different colors and they're made by different people and they don't fit together well, and like the plaster and the glue is visible, and I feel like some of us can feel like we see the bursting at the seams in a way that they squash so much content into season 3. And it also led to this really disjointed feeling where the momentum was up and down, but it would kill its momentum that's built up. So the first 2 episodes of The Mandalorian, I think we all quite enjoyed, although I remember Kat saying that the first episode was kind of cringe and felt like a fetch quest, and it was very video gamey, and it was just Din checking in at place A, place B, place C, going with the ship, going with Grogu. It felt like it was, I do agree, it almost felt like a little tick box exercise, and it was like a Kathleen Kennedy, Jon Favreau agreement to have this kind of, let's check in with everybody in the Mandoverse because it's been a while, and we want to bring back season 2 finale's goodwill and paper over the Book of Boba Fett. Almost don't refer to that much at all. And I think it's interesting how there's so much talk of Mandalorians in Mandalore, and we know that Din had a fantastic crossover in season 2 with Boba, And I think the best episode I feel of Boba Fett, just featuring the Fett himself, is the tragedy. So the chapter on Tython, because A, you're tying in so much EU stuff with Legends coming back to be real. B, you got the new Disney stuff and great ideas, and Grogu's active, and he's not just a passenger or somebody who things happen to, or that's somebody who's in like the cradle or in the bubble, or in the assassin droid, which we can come to later. But that didn't really fit either. It kind of felt like a mishmash of tones when they tried to inject humor and bring Grogu into like a slapstick, almost Jar Jar-esque like role, which I felt really weird, and it did not really fit in the season 3 finale. And it was quite jarring to me in the penultimate episode when he had that come back, because again, it felt like a storyline that, oh, we had this good idea before when we were with Grief Karga on Navarro. And I love the fact that in the opening chapter of season 3, we had a new shiny Navarro, and it was improved, and it wasn't either like a desolate town, and we weren't on a sandy Tatooine-esque locale either. And what did they do? They reduced it to rubble. But at least
they set up the Mandalorian encampment in this whole place, and they were there for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I don't understand. I think it'd be beneficial for Star Wars to have a better indication of time and place. So I think we could talk about this later, and it's definitely a thing that sci-fi fantasy does, which is, it's high fantasy. We can fly wherever we want, and no one ages, and the time doesn't matter. And it takes 10 minutes to go to Coruscant and 20 minutes to go to the Outer Rim. And it's just like sailing ships rather than spaceships, and like faster than light travel, which is okay because we don't need to explain everything. And there's a mystique and magic to Star Wars that makes it much different to, say, Star Trek and some of the actual traditional hardcore scientific sci-fi material. But I think they should do a better place of showing us, not telling us who's what, where people are, what they're up to. There were so many moments where Gideon was mentioned. It's like a magistrate, high council, tribunal with the New Republic. Oh, he's escaped. I've heard he might escape. Has he escaped? Over like 3 episodes. And those 3 episodes were, I think, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th episode. And the middle one of those is the Mandalorian one, which was like an episode of Andor. And I loved the diversion on Coruscant, and that was like a bottle episode that you get in like sitcoms or anime, where it's completely independent, and you can just take it like it's a slice of life, almost like King of the Hill, snapshot of Coruscant in the New Republic. And it was incredible. And there were so many Easter eggs. But even aside from that, it was just very well told, and it was reasonably written, if not, Andor heights. But it had a lot of tension, and they didn't make good on those characters. They should have brought back some of those characters in a more substantial way, rather than like Elia Kane, the spies. Who were the spies? So you had Elia Kane just making evils at people and looking at like at Carson Teva suspiciously in like an office environment. I mean, it's funny, it's interesting, but it's not tension, it's not suspense, and it didn't add anything to either character. It just stalled the story.
Theory that the reason the episode The Spies is called The Spies is because, the first episode is called The Apostate, biblical. And in the Bible, the spies are the ones who return to Israel, much like the Mandalorians are the ones who are returning, finally, the big return to Mandalore, their homeland. And that sounds like that makes sense. Problem is, nobody's going to pick up on that except for maybe a fraction of a percent of the audience. Another thing is that, the whole subplot of having to go get Axe Woves and Koska Reeves on Plaisir 15 is basically filler and an unnecessary complication that just takes away time you could have spent on Gideon. And that's
way too many unnecessary cameos.
That was an episode written around cameos, and it's like, I'm all for world building, but not if it comes at the expense of the story. Like if there were 22 episodes, like a normal season of television, then okay, you could do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it felt like one of those.
But then the internal logic didn't work either. It's like they said, oh, we abandoned her because she wants the Darksaber to reclaim Andor. It's like, well, that was the plan in season 2, and you were on board with it. So again, lazy writing, which is why I hope they pay your writers and you can hire better writers. Because I know that Favreau is credited as the writer, but obviously, there's a whole team of uncredited staff writers who work on these things. Underpaid staff writers who aren't like connecting the dots and stuff because they're not being brought into the main the main war room, if you will, that's planning out the whole season from start to finish. And it's like they're just having to kind of write this stuff on the fly, and it just doesn't work. Because again, like I mentioned with the Pirate Vane, yeah, you gave him a backstory, but he doesn't really have an actual character arc. He's a sleazy guy, a sleazy idiot pirate in the beginning, and he's still a sleazy idiot pirate at the end. Did we need to spend all that time on him? You could have just introduced him as a sleazy pirate in the beginning of Skeleton Crew, and there's your villain. Like, unless they're going to tie it back specifically into the event.
Or you could have, and don't get me wrong, is I love the actor that plays Marty. Loved having him on the show. Loved hearing the behind the scenes kind of thing there. But had you delved into the deeper universe and things that were already there, and you had made those pirates Hondo Onaka's crew, boom, instant backstory. It's already there. Done. It's called Clone Wars and Rebels.
Yeah,
perfect.
I don't think they've put a definitive age for his species, so just bring in Hondo Onaka. We know he's still around.
That's what I'm saying. Is you could have literally brought in Hondo. Whole other character, and bringing Hondo to live action without it being Jim Cummings, whole other issues.
I think they will do that.
You could have tried something and done that instant backstory done. There,
definitely. But there was a lot.
It's not how it is, and I don't know how much is this. The pay your writers more, or the writers are lazy, or the writers are bad, or is it being interjected at different levels that the writers have to please so many different masters? Is, okay, Dave and John have given them this story. Oh, wait, you've got to put this in. Oh, wait, I need a cameo because, oh, wait, we've been promoting the fact that Christopher Lloyd is going to be in season 3. We've been pushing that forever. And how disappointing was that cameo? I'm expecting wow. I didn't mind the Jack Black cameo as much as the Christopher Lloyd cameo bothered me, because Jack Black was being Jack Black, and it was like, okay, fine.
He was just quirking
especially that cringy scene at the end between the three of them, and that Lizzo. Okay, great entertainer, great singer. I'm sorry, honey, you can't act. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That was.
I didn't know that was because I'd heard. I didn't realize at the time, but I actually had heard her music before, because I usually don't seek out artist names. Like, I'll hear the music, I'm like, hey, that's good. So I didn't know that was her at first. But I could tell she had to be somebody famous, because there's no way you're going to cast somebody who can't act unless it means something. Case in point, I complained the same thing about Gina Carano. It's like, I didn't know she was UFC when she was first in there, and I didn't think she was a very good actress. She got better, admittedly, over the second season, but it's like they obviously brought her in because they were trying to bring in the UFC numbers to get fans.
Yeah.
And that's the wrong way of looking at these shows. If you cast good actors for well-written roles, it will bring in people, even those who are not necessarily Star Wars people. Don't keep thinking about, oh, well, this person's famous, this person's famous. Like, I read an article the other day. I can't remember the actress's name, but she lost a role in a movie because she didn't have enough Instagram followers. Because the studio was thinking more about how you can promote things through your own, how popular you are, as opposed to whether or not you're the right character or the right actor for the role. It's the most asinine levels of corporatism and corporate thing, writing by committee that you can imagine.
Well, don't even get me started. There's a whole crew that's like the private crew that's going on a lunar mission that's going around the moon, that was chosen and based on their social media status. And
really?
Like, yeah.
I'm trying to avoid everything to do with Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX.
No, not even. No, that's not even him.
Oh,
this is a whole other kind of deal. I'll tell you about that offline. But
okay.
Yeah,
it's happening everywhere, isn't it?
But that's where we're at. Is they brought it. I had no idea who Lizzo was, because I am not the demographic that they were attempting to bring in. I am the demographic who watched Return of the Jedi, the original trilogy, in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't need me. I'm already here. So they're going out, and instead of good writing and good story and bring people to it, they're looking to do that and bring the people who know who Lizzo is, who is not me. I
do ask.
And that strategy would work if they had.
But why? Yeah, I don't.
Because the thing is, the strategy would work if they had good writing to make it good content, and if the person could have actually act. But the fact that that's not happening means it's failing.
Do you
Um,
think they'll identify that episode as the weakest point of the season and a failure in every sense going forward, or do you think they're just going to like batten down the hatches and go forward with the plan? The other thing I want to say is
they're going to batten down the hatches and go forward with the plan, because Kenobi was an atrociously written series as well, and they're like, oh, it's a Kennedy celebration. It's like, it was a tremendous success. I'm like, was it? It's like
narratively no.
No, I mean, I admit that
for fans, I guess it was
the
quite,
actress who
quite fun.
plays Leia is a very educated, intelligent person. When you see her, amazing for her age. That doesn't mean the character and the story is any good, or that the Reva character made any sense whatsoever, and that the internal story logic is just bonkers. And it's like, so if they don't see the problem there, like they didn't even have the foresight to tell one of their chief writers that you should watch Revenge of the Sith before this, or the writer wasn't even smart enough to think they needed to do that, then I don't think they're going to take any cues from the miscues here, and they're just going to keep battening down the hatches and going along with what they're doing.
So we've talked about this one before, because we did talk about Kenobi, and I enjoyed Kenobi.
It was fun.
The obvious there are issues with the writing, the direction, but the nostalgia and the seeing Ewan McGregor for me overruled all of that. Now, what did get annoying was like they put enough money into the actors that they got on that show that they did not have the budget to do the kind of space battles and the kind of immersive worlds and the great things that were in Mando season 3, because Kenobi's doing a thing with the random guy who's the fake, not random guy, the cameo of the guy who is a known actor that's the fake Jedi, but there's like a 3-foot fluorescent light hanging over their head, and I'm just like, dude, did you just seriously go to Home Depot and get a light fixture that
it's kind of like you said,
Imperial panel and put over top of that?
Well, it's like you said, Dave. They got you on nostalgia, but they just stopped after. But that's the problem. We'll get the nostalgia part, but we're not going to try after that, because that's all we need to get people in the theater. Which I've been hearing is kind of the reception to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It's a checklist of nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, and that's why it's sitting on very low percentage right now. So we'll see.
Yeah, but that again is one that has hooked me, and I have to see myself now.
Right. I noticed that the positive reviews for that movie specifically mentioned the fact. I mean, obviously everybody who saw it at the same theater, Con Theater at the festival, with Harrison Ford's introduction. But the ones that were positive reviews specifically singled out Ford's introduction of the movie, whereas the negative reviews were only talking about the actual movie itself. And it's like we saw last year when everybody saw Kenobi at Anaheim. Obviously they're going to love it because of the whole environment and everything. But then when they watched it in totality, it's like, wait, what? And I feel that I'm still crossing my fingers that it's still going to be a good movie, but we'll see. But it goes back to the same complaint with Star Wars. It's that they fish you in with the nostalgia, they lure you in with the nostalgia bait, and then they stop trying. Kind of like when they announced The Acolyte, like, oh, well, we got the writer from Russian Doll. I'm like, okay, great. But that doesn't tell me anything about whether she knows Star Wars or whether it's going to be a good show or not. And they felt that was a sufficient announcement to hold people over.
Well, because the nostalgia and the thing can be done right.
It can be. It can be done right.
Afterlife.
Very well.
Done right. Top Gun Maverick.
Maverick did the
done
best.
Right.
Yeah. Maverick is the gold standard, I think. And Mad Max Fury Road, I think. But it wasn't as nostalgic. It was more revolutionary. And that's what I want from Star Wars films. I want them to be benchmarks that everyone else aspires to get towards. And it is really disappointing to hear about Dial of Destiny, but I'm still hoping that, remember berries aside, to use a South Park meme for The Force Awakens and J.J. Abrams, James Mangold, I think, is a very strong writer-director and kind of has an auteur feel. If you've seen Walk the Line, you can kind of appreciate that. He got a great performance out of Reese Witherspoon and Johnny Cash. And he's exactly who I wanted to see do a serious Wolverine film, and Logan, I think, is the best X-Men film ever made. One of the best comic book adaptations, I'd say, right up there with The Dark Knight and The Avengers. So I think that James Mangold's a good person to have in Star Wars, and I hope that he can have more of an influence and impact on writers, on other directors and producers, on the background cast and crew. And also on the kind of, if is there still a story group? I don't even think there is now. I mean, if there is, it's not doing a good job.
I'm completely baffled as to how they're still employees of the company, given that there's clearly no correlation between the film, the books, and the series versus what they do. Because the way the story goes, the story group were consultants that were paid consultants that George actually used, but they didn't become full employees with benefits until Kennedy came along because Pablo Hidalgo exploited her lack of Star Wars knowledge to, hey, make us employees, which is okay, good for them, but then they didn't use them for anything. It's more like, oh, you can go to the story group as a creator if you want to, but they're not like,
no
oh,
obligation to do so.
Here's a story group. They don't do that.
Yeah, it should be a board that sits in on the beginning, like the first, before they even do way before they do like table reads with cast and crew, the way they famously did in, I think, the Vogue shoot was black and white. It was late 2014, and it was the whole crew and the main cast of The Force Awakens with JJ at Pinewood, and you had photos of like Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Oscar Isaac, Adam Driver, all looking like they had a lot of fun. And that's when Star Wars really felt exciting, especially from a movie point of view. And we really have lost that because of the failed announcements that didn't get cancelled. And that's why it's hard to even put any stock into the 3 huge film announcements. We barely touched on the subject last time in our Celebration review because there was so much to talk about. And it's a shame because that was announced on the big Celebration panel. It's gigantic news for the film industry as well as for Star Wars and Disney+. But it doesn't feel like there's enough stability and consistency from Star Wars or any of these big properties to.
Well, they started The Force Awakens with that kind of nostalgia and that big table read. Remember, like one of the first promo images that we saw was the original cast, those that were still living, and the new cast, Boyega, Daisy Ridley, Adam Driver, peppered in and doing that big family group table read kind of look. But I really think a lot of the disjointed issues are we've gone away from writer-directors and going from that story group and having the writing to the directors having way too much power to change anything they darn well please to make the movie their own. And when you don't have the consistent director, when it changes every movie, and sometimes I wonder if that happens too in the shows, like in Mando season 3 or in all the Mando seasons, you can fish out which one was directed by Rick, which one was directed by Bryce. And you're going, oh, I like that episode because of the way that they do it. And then you go, oh, that's Taika because Taika has Taika's style and that's Taika's style. And it works for some things and it doesn't work for some.
That's why I thought it was bizarre that when it leaked on our channel that Rick was going to be directing the finale.
No, it didn't. No, it didn't.
Somewhere on the interwebs, the whole internet.
But that's exactly the point I'm making. It's like if you have good directors making good quality stuff, the fact that they're aware of the fact that people like episodes directed by him specifically, but they're not excited about the other directors, should tell you something about the quality of the other episodes that you've been putting out lately. And where your priorities should last. Whereas, I mean, episode 7 and 8 was a pretty smooth transition, and then episode 9 is like we got to throw everything away. And then Rogue One, Gareth Edwards did his own thing, and they're like, no, we don't like the amount of power. Maybe they gave him too much power, or whatever it is. No, we got to bring in Tony Gilroy now. Solo, no, we don't like what Lord and Miller have been doing. No, we got to bring in, Ron Howard to say, we don't like that. And it's like, I don't know.
But maybe if we had a director who would follow the script that was written well.
Perhaps. It's funny. Let's go back to 1977. So George Lucas had written Star Wars, the Star Wars, with Starkiller and whatnot. And we had Ralph McQuarrie's concept art. Then he very quickly created this gigantic machine that he didn't see as a machine just then. Although he did have the foresight to ask for the merchandising rights, which, that's the reason why Star Wars has got the best merch around and still printing money for Mickey Mouse. But he was the consistent through line through the original trilogy, even if he didn't direct. You had Irving Kershner and Richard Marquand for Empire and for Jedi. You still had him producing, and I think, was it his wife at the time who was also a producer, along with
And
himself.
the editor.
Right. And yeah, and I think like was it Lee Brackett, I think, who also helped with The Empire
Yep.
Strikes Back. So you had these other voices in the room who weren't just yes men. And then fast forward 25 years, you got The Phantom Menace and the prequel trilogy. George Lucas is basically buddies with Rick Callum, and he's surrounded by yes men. But at least there he was the writer and director for every film. So the original trilogy, he wrote everything, and he had a team that kind of said yes and no, which is why you had chances for Harrison Ford to improvise and also play himself. I think it's amazing. I haven't rewatched them recently, but I was thinking of Han Solo and Princess Leia's characters in Empire and Jedi, and they're actually quite different. In the third film of the trilogy, I think Return of the Jedi has Leia and Han going back a little bit to their playful, push and pull like they had in the first film. Kind of antagonistic, and definitely like there's chemistry, there's spark, there's flirtation and all that. But there's more of an understanding and less of the anger that Princess Leia had and that Han had. Like, what do you think? A guy like me and a girl like her? And then Luke's like, to convince him, just pulling on the material strings, she's rich. So you have these reasons why Han Solo is the way he is, and where Leia Organa is the way she is, and you don't know about their backstory. You don't know about Han's until many years later with Solo. Anniversary shout out and amazing t-shirt worn by our Dave. And then you've got Princess Leia, whose backstory we just saw in Kenobi. Didn't really need to see that, but we have a lot of layers of Carrie Fisher's character infused into Princess Leia, and I think that's why every year when it's the anniversary of her death and Debbie Reynolds' death, as well as when it's Mother's Day, the Star Wars stuff is all about Leia. You see Leia and Carrie Fisher everywhere, and we saw that recently, just 2 weeks ago.
Well,
So
and let me hit you there too. Is we are going to be here on the VCN. It's been announced once, but it's going to be a lot more coming very soon. We're going to have an entire show dedicated to the women of Star Wars, the Daughters of the Galaxy. So, right. And when you write that book, when you do that show, episode 1, chapter 1, Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia Organa, General Leia Organa, all of those things, and that's going to be the show. So look out for that on our Facebook page and this channel right here. That's coming. It's so good. I want to know how much of the original trilogy, how much did Irving Kershner insert himself as a director into that story, or how much did he follow George, and that why it was as successful as it was?
You also had Lawrence Kasdan as well, who I forgot to mention.
Well, it sounds like George didn't really have any hands-on involvement that much in Empire because he was off setting up Lucasfilm and trying to relocate up north and make that all work, whereas he ended up getting more hands-on with Return of the Jedi simply because the director didn't really know how to work with special effects very much. But he kind of remained hands-off because he didn't really care about doing the sequels. It's like, okay, I made the first one. It was wildly successful. Now I'm going to focus on setting up the company. There was no urgent rush to do the sequel as quickly as they did because he owns it. So it's like he doesn't have to rush it immediately if he wants to. So he could have waited until he set up Lucasfilm's new headquarters and then done it himself, but he didn't want to do it himself. He handed it off to Irvin and Lawrence, like, here, you guys do it. And then handing it off again, Lawrence and Marquand, here, you guys do it. And then he tried to do the same thing for Phantom Menace. He offered it to David Fincher, who turned it down. He offered it to Ron Howard, who turned it. Yep, he did. He offered it to Ron Howard, who turned it down. And the consensus was that nobody wanted the responsibility of bringing back Star Wars because if they failed, it would be the end of their careers. And so George
too big a burden to bear.
Right, and so George is like, okay, fine, I'll do it myself. And he wasn't really interested, as we could see, he hadn't directed a movie in 20 years, and he wasn't very interested in the actual filming aspect of directing, which is why
he was, can the technology do what I want the technology to do?
It's like, we'll green screen it and post whatever.
And yes, I still think that he only went back and did that trilogy for the sake of using it as an R&D department for ILM, much like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles was ILM stretching their legs a bit. And so eventually that paves the way for, the Oscar that they won for Dead Man's Chest. You wouldn't have had CGI that looked that good if you didn't have the work they did on the prequels. But that seemed to be the impetus for why he went back and finished the story. It wasn't about finishing the story for the sake of finishing the story. It's like, oh, this is a perfect IP I could use to, for my experiment with ILM and visual effects in general and paving the way eventually for the volume.
Isn't that sad though that you've got Pirates winning the Oscar for Academy for special effects, even though Star Wars did the groundwork, and also just the fact that there's a Pirates film that has an Oscar when a Star Wars film doesn't. It's crazy to me.
Well, if you go back and you watch the show with Hal Hickel, and you hear every single bit of what he talks about, and here's what, regardless of how good it's so good that a lot of my favorite part of that was him telling me things that were CG that I'm like, what that was CG? What? You know, is you just completely and totally assume that was real, that was practical. No, that was CG. That's why that won the Oscar for that.
Yeah, plus Star Wars won a visual effects Oscar in a special category created for it back in '78, and it won 7 Oscars total. But yeah, it's kind of like it was like in the R&D department why he didn't do it. And when he gave that interview with Charlie Rose explaining how corporations just take IP and put it on a conveyor belt, they try and find what's the most profitable thing, and they just keep printing more and more of it. We saw that also with the Terminator franchise, where after the success of Terminator 2, every Terminator sequel after that was recycling that same exact plot. It's like, no, the reason Terminator 2 works because it was a really different take on the similar plot, that it had a lot of heart to it, and it felt genuinely new for a sequel, and even better. So maybe you should do that for the third one instead of just recycling the same plot on or over and over and over again through, 4 more sequels. It's like, no.
Infinitely worse each time as well. That's why I think the only good Terminator sequel, apart from Judgment Day, which I think is the definitive Terminator for me anyway, Terminator 1 feels like a prologue to the real Judgment Day, Terminator 2.
Yeah, and we're seeing... But that's what we're seeing going on at Disney right now with Star Wars. It's like we're going to find what's like Force Awakens. There was no story. It's like we're going to redo the original movie. And they say, well, Star Wars rhymes. It's like, well, then you should be rhyming with Phantom Menace because this is the era of the New Republic. We should be seeing what the Rebels achieved in its coming to fruition rather than, oh, it's over. It just got blown to pieces. It's like, what?
I wish they'd done. Now that you mentioned David Fincher, I forgot he'd done. He was one of the shortlist for George Lucas for The Phantom Menace. Disney should have gone to David Fincher. They never would have because it's Disney, right?
But he wouldn't have done it anyway.
Probably not. But what was he doing in 2014, 2013?
But the reason he didn't do it in '97 when he was primed to need a big movie after coming off 7, it's like he turned it down because his career was just starting to take off. He's like, no, it's going to be a career ender if I don't do it right. And that would still apply potentially today. He doesn't want to, he wouldn't have done that. Plus, he's doing his own thing. I think then he was doing House of Cards still for Netflix.
Right. But the thing is, he had that blemish on his record from Sci-Fi, which was Alien 3, right?
That wasn't really his fault, though. That was a ton of extra,
So I think that it would have been interesting if Disney had done their homework a bit more. Instead of saying, okay, let's rinse and repeat A New Hope. I still think the biggest flaw in Disney's plan for Star Wars was to have The Force Awakens be cut and paste, but for the new generation of A New Hope, because it was creatively bankrupt. And when you begin to build your entire franchise again on something that's creatively bankrupt, there's no foundation that's solid. So as soon as you mount The Last Jedi on top of it, the whole thing collapses in a sinkhole.
Well, that's another reason that Fincher probably wouldn't do it, because studio interference in an IP film being Alien 3, it's like you had a bad experience working with studio interference there. It's like, do you want to do it again with another? It's like, no. And Lucas,
that was so bad that I think even Disney films probably feel more fun and more.
And see, that's probably an entire show that we can discuss. Is can you make a studio film with an established IP at this point without that kind of interference? That's just going to just.
I think the last one that you saw for that was The Last Jedi, and that's going to be the last one. Because then they just, I still don't know why they wouldn't go with Colin's script. Like, that's going to be the biggest mystery. Like, I don't get it. And
he had a slightly unsuccessful film, didn't he?
You see, if that's the trend that they're using and the justification, then that's really wrong-headed to say that, oh, well, you had one bad day at the office. Like, everybody has a bad day at the office. It's like,
well, that's what they did with Gina Carano in a different way. It's what they did with James Gunn in a different way. It was like one blemish from the past, which you should always be allowed to forgive. The rest.
The rumor of what got Patty Jenkins kicked off the Rogue One movie. At first, it was that, I got to do Wonder Woman 3 first.
Yeah.
Well, then it's like, well, that And
Wonder
did
Woman
You
2
had
was so
Wonder
good,
Woman
wasn't it?
2.
Yeah,
right,
1984 was so
right.
good.
But the thing is, that's the thing is that 7 months ago we knew that wasn't happening anymore. So they could have brought her to Celebration and said, "Hey, we're working on the Rogue Squadron movie," but they don't want to do it because on the press junket for Wonder Woman 84, she said she had a lot more creative control than she did over the first movie. And it's like, oh, well, that movie fans didn't like it and blah, blah, blah. So I guess you're incapable of ever making a good movie again, which seems to be Lucasfilm's position and not hiring her for that, which is ridiculous. And if that's the logic they're using for how, like, if you're that, like, chicken about what kind of directors you're going to get, ooh, they did one thing, but do I want to keep them on? Oh, I can't. It's like, come on, it's just you gotta have some balls to be the president of Lucasfilm, and I think but the mystery is how much of that is Lucasfilm versus how much of that is Disney, and Disney's corporate level thinking.
It's
It's like
hard
Yeah,
I,
for us to
is
parse through it at the moment, isn't it?
deciphering who is what and who's in charge of where does this come from and this mandate and the thing. And, why are we getting now the entire Filoni-verse, which is kind of explaining what happened between the last successful, really loved property, not as well, known, but Star Wars Rebels, and
Yeah.
bridging that to the sequel trilogy is where are all these gaps, what all this happened, what happened in there, and that's where we're at. That's the time frame we get. We're not getting a new movie that just tells, oh, here, that we're not getting this yet, but here between this that was successful, let's give you all this stuff to make you like this stuff that you didn't really like more because you understand this.
Right. I mean, that does make sense. It's funny because we've kind of, again, not spoken about the 3 films they announced, and it feels like it's almost like if we speak about them, do we jinx it? I don't think we can, though, because we'd reverse jinx it, right? It'd be like a counter curse. So if we jinx it now, it will happen. So let's talk about Dawn of the Jedi.
well, I think that's actually the one that has the best chance of getting made because they now have a working relationship with James Mangold, whereas all the other fired
Exactly.
directors they didn't have that.
That's exactly why I labored that point for about 2
My
minutes.
money's
then
on the
again,
Filoni
if
movie.
actually
My
come to
money's
think
on the
of it,
Filoni movie.
come to
The
think of
Filoni
it,
movie.
if Dial of Destiny doesn't do very well, they might get chicken, go chicken again and get rid of him and say, oh, he's no longer directing Dawn of the Jedi as a creative difference.
I think you're right. He has a lot of tendrils and social networks within Lucasfilm and Disney now, because at Celebration, the reason why Daphne Keene's involved in Star Wars, and no one said this, but it was clear, is because she loved working with James Mangold, and James Mangold recommended her with her agent to be part of the Acolyte. And so you've got those kind of connections going on. You also have so the main character who came out in the Padme Amidala Senator cosplay, Amanda Stenberg. She was actually Rue. Do you remember in the Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen had a friend who was had like a bit of an afro, and she was mute, and she would point when other kids were hunting them. Yeah, so she was a little kid. She's the one in the forest that, spoiler alert, took an arrow to the chest and died in Jennifer Lawrence's arms in the 3rd act of the Hunger Games.
See,
So
I am excited for Acolyte. I am excited for Acolyte. You
I am
can't
too.
stop me from being excited for
It
Acolyte.
had a lot of good buzz, and everyone who came out on the live stage, including Amanda Stenberg, who came out in cosplay, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just an aesthetics, just a visual cue to stir people up and get them in a frenzy. She definitely loved Star Wars. It was quite clear. And it wasn't just that, but Daphne Keane seemed to love it. James Mangold came to talk about Indy, Dial of Destiny.
Eunice, how
he was-
excited Eunice is for the Acolyte.
Exactly. That guy, they need to capture his energy and like spill it on the story group or Kathleen Kennedy. Or
Well, that's just it. It's like you
give
have
that buzz.
not letting passionate people write these things. It's like,
I'd
again,
love to see if he has an influence
page
on
by
the
page.
Wookiee Jedi. Yeah.
it's each page by committee. That's
Yeah,
That's why guys like Adam Sandler and the like are going to do these ridiculous movies over at Netflix because they don't have that type of interference. Even though the Netflix quality isn't great, they're like, well, it's better because you don't have studio heads breathing over your neck over literally every joke in a comedy script like you do for big studio comedies. It's like maybe you should trust the people who are bringing in fans consistently to write the humor and that they know what they're doing, instead of mandating every little thing, and that's kind of like what we're seeing with Lucasfilm right now.
Exactly.
Which
Feels
is
like
why I
something-
hope that when the writer's strike eventually ends, that they get better writers. It's going to take some type of because again, it took Solo flopping in the box office for Bob Iger to take a step back and saying, "Okay, you were right. We went too fast. What should we do?" And she's like, "Put Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau together." That's what happened.
It's the best thing she did, right?
Yeah, because again, they wanted Solo to take off. They wanted to make money. They doubled the budget by rehiring the directors and all that kind of thing. And it was in June when they started putting them together, or when she put them together, and off they went to the races for Mandalorian, which eventually Disney started interfering in once the Grogu character turned out to be this immense pop culture sensation of money for Disney. And that prompted them to interfere with, do Book of Boba Fett, bring Grogu back, and, blah, blah, blah. Exactly.
Yeah. Wasn't there was
I am Star Wars now.
Wasn't there a specific interview clip which Jon Favreau basically did tell us? His eyes kind of sold it more. I don't remember exactly word for word what he said, but it was effectively that in his mind's eye, and I think that's how we felt with season 2. That was the perfect finale for the Mandalorian, at least for Grogu. Baby Yoda's with Luke.
Yeah.
We see Pedro Pascal finally willingly take his mask off, not for like some hot girl in the village, just to eat some food together, and not with Bill Burr to deceive some angry Imperials. Yeah, it had a genuine reason. It wasn't to save his life like in the season finale of season 1. He did it to connect to Grogu one last time. And the puppeteering and the CGI was amazing in that episode, especially that very final scene, because there's so much swelling emotion. And they didn't rely on John Williams' music to create tension and emotion in that finale, whether it was Luke mysteriously through the CCTV, scything down those Dark Troopers in a very Darth Vader end of Rogue One style and manner. It was very reflective of other parts of Star Wars without really... It was riffing on stuff rather than repeating stuff. And I think that's what Star Wars needs to do better. Solo did that well. Because although Solo gave us a backstory that a lot of people didn't want or thought was unnecessary, and they fired the improvisational team of Lord and Miller first, I'd still love to see what Lord and Miller could do with the Star Wars project. But Ron Howard was like a solid, safe pair of hands, and we got a solid, breezy adventure. It wasn't, revolutionary, but it wasn't bad either. It was a lot of fun, and it was a single story, and I think we're going to see more opportunities for single stories.
Yeah, and
especially with these 3 films.
Solo got the reputation that it did and didn't do as well as it did because there was an active campaign online to tank it because of how quickly it came on the heels of The Last Jedi.
That didn't have anywhere near the effect that a lot of the fanboys want you to believe it did. The reason Solo tanked is because 3 weeks before they finished filming, they fired their directors and they were starting over basically from scratch. And anytime the actors were being interviewed for other projects, the question would always come up, how's Solo going? And they give these very rehearsed answers. Oh, it's great. And the only person promoting it was Ron Howard. And of course, he's the director. He's going to say good things about it. It's like for the longest time, they just let that simmer that, this is, and then you had the anonymous sources coming out saying that, Alden Ehrenreich did a great audition for Han Solo, but under Lord Miller, it was complete parody. And then it's like, oh, geez, they don't really seem to have a handle on what they're doing. So you have all that ill will coming in. And then they didn't want the marketing for Solo to cross over with the marketing for Last Jedi. And so they didn't really market the movie very much. And then it got buried by just the intense pop culture sensation that was Infinity War, followed by Deadpool 2, which was more anticipated. So by the time Solo came out, it's like nobody really cared.
It was in the tailwind of Infinity War. It was released in the UK and Europe 3.5 weeks after Infinity War. And so many people...
I hadn't seen a lot of replay value.
Yeah, and I hadn't seen Infinity War on time. I actually, of all the big blockbuster films that I've enjoyed in the last 10 years, Infinity War I saw 4 weeks after it was released. So I didn't see Solo until 6 or 7 weeks later. I saw it on a very small screen. There's just 2 of us, and it was a room of like 20 people.
I saw it on opening day. It was a packed house, like sold out crowd.
Good.
I thought the movie was going to do well. It's like, oh, wow.
It deserved that. I think it was a solid film. I don't have any major issues with any specific parts of it. Apart from, I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge is an irritating person as a droid, but that's not really her fault. And I find it weird that she's in the Falcon now, but Those are things that they often do with Star Wars. They kind of give us.
Well, at least they didn't like retcon and give her like the ship's voice, like on Star Trek, or something.
Yeah, that would have been a little too much, right?
But that also goes back to something you mentioned earlier about how the ending for Grogu in season 2 was really good, and then it kind of gets weird towards the end of season 3 when the armor tells Din Djarin that he has to adopt Grogu, and he's all like, "What? Like he can't stand it." Like, didn't you kind of do that in Book of Boba Fett?
Yeah, we thought that was kind of already. That was beating you over the head with something that was already there. It's like, oh, now this is his son. It's like, dude, this has been his son since like
day one. Yeah. Since they almost did the ET thing and touched fingers. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, so I that was another weird thing that, again, the writing of that doesn't make sense. And so, I mean, fool me once, fool me twice, fool me thrice. I've seen great trailers for Obi-Wan Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian season 3, and they all kind of were So, yeah, the trailer for Ahsoka looks good, and the only reason I have a slight more optimism for it is because Dave Filoni is obsessed with the Ahsoka character, and perhaps the writing therefore will be better.
Yes.
We'll see.
I think that there's one more thing I want to say about The Mandalorian. So let's go with we've talked about kind of the drawbacks and cons a lot, and it's to do with writing and behind the scenes stuff and killing momentum and trying to tie it in with lots of other things, and also being at the behest of like corporations and the CEO type thing and wanting to like print money with merch and show lots of Grogu because we didn't see much Grogu. We didn't see enough Grogu. Let's put Grogu in. Let's put him in the assassin droid. I still don't understand that. The whole no, yes, no thing. It reminded me of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 with Grogu, with Groot, because he does something similar.
I still think that's the slapstick original. If you say that doesn't have a complete place,
it does. It definitely
3PO
does.
and R2 as Laurel and Hardy, basically.
Definitely. I prefer Grogu to not be an homage to people we've seen before who've done it better with R2 and 3PO, because they were actually characters from the Hidden Fortress. The two comedic characters that were slapstick and kind of mute and would hit each other and stuff in the Hidden Fortress, which I think would be a great watch along if we could do that.
Sure.
That's the basis in terms of samurai filmmaking from Kurosawa that George Lucas kind of used A New Hope as a foundation to build on that. And the reason why Jon Favreau and especially David Filoni, being George Lucas's apprentice for many years, the reason why they have such a lock on some of the tone of Star Wars in The Mandalorian, and it really kicks off amazingly in the first season. The opening chapter of The Mandalorian is still 10 out of 10 perfect, is because it evokes that loneliness, but also that longing for companionship that Star Wars is all about. And you can say the Vin Diesel, it's about family, but it's a lot more than that, right? And
Don't you get me started on that.
Yeah, so that franchise is obviously insane, but it has an audience and it knows what it's doing, and it's self-aware enough to not try and pull the wool over anyone's eyes. I think Star Wars needs to be more self-aware without looking like or sounding like it's parody or satire. And parts of The Last Jedi that didn't go down with some audiences, especially older audiences, were the parts where it felt like it was sending up Star Wars, but in a malicious way, or for a quick laugh, or to make a satirical point, and not in an organic way that fit in with the universe. I think I'm glad that we got the Solo that we did, because from what Lord and Miller sounded like they wanted, I think it would have been not the tone that Solo needed. And if they do a Donald Glover or Alden Ehrenreich young Lando, young Solo series, Disney Plus would be perfect. Give us 8 episodes of that.
Yeah, but you mentioned that somebody asked her about that, I think, like in the press room at Celebration about.
The
articles
were written about Donald Glover is ready for it. They were saying
she's like, no, she said he's not. She says that's the issue. She said we're waiting on him, and I'm thinking, if you actually liked playing this character and you have this ready to go, why? What do you mean you're waiting on him? And if he calls you back, it's like that. Like you sounded pretty adamant when you announced at the investor call that you had a Lando series in mind, that Donald Glover was attached. Which again, common sense dictates that you'd already have pen to paper on signing those contracts and the budget parameters, so everything's ready to go. But we're kind of waiting on him to see if he's going to be available if he even wants to do it. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
which is why
I don't buy. I don't. Genuinely, I don't buy anything she says, and it's got to a point where I think she's great and she's awesome and she's got an incredible track record. Nobody can say
Yeah, as a
anything about
producer.
it. As a producer, she's done some of the best films ever. Some of Spielberg's best films are produced by her. She'll be there as the third name on the credits of Jurassic Park, which I still think is the definitive blockbuster for me, aside from like Star Wars. More than Jaws, to me, it's Jurassic Park that set the benchmark for all blockbusters going forward. But that might be a generational thing because Jaws was 1973 and Jurassic Park was 19.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to stop you there because we've gone down our like 8th rabbit hole, and all of these rabbit holes I think are complete and total other shows. Is right there. That's a whole talk that we can totally do, and you will probably see us in the future do. We've got a couple of other shows here that we may get some of those topics in before we start talking about that whole summertime, and we're going to do the lead up and the speculation and all of that for the Ahsoka show. And I think that's where we're going to be going forward. But thank you for listening to us and joining us tonight. If you want to see some more of this talk, you can go for our other shows, Rebels Revisited. You can check out the Jedi Archives, which are going to be talking about the High Republic, which is, you think, here's the circle I'm going, because the new High Republic comics are talking about like the Battle of Jeddah that brings us into Rogue One, and all of this content is tied in. And so we are getting Star Wars content even through the midst of the writer's strike. And we hope that gets satisfactorily settled sooner rather than later, that people get what they need, get what they want, and they can go back to doing the kind of things that they love and making us content that we love and that we need.
Yeah, there's one thing I do want to say. Moff Gideon lives because you look at the makeup that he wore. He wore loads of makeup in the finale and in the penultimate episode. The mustache was not there, but he was very, very shiny, and it wasn't CG. It wasn't deep fake. It was his skin was a different complexion and tone, and it was tighter around his face. And if you look at the clones in all of Star Wars, they have like a skin skeletal issue. That's why Snoke is so weird, and Palpatine is always like, ugh. I genuinely think they could definitely open that door. I don't think they planned for it. It sounds like they always had the scheme that Moff Gideon would be burned by Grogu. I had no idea that was real. That sounds incredible. It does give me hope for future Star Wars planning from a story point of view. It does make me think it's not all slapdash, but
we can hope. And, again, we have to go with in Filoni we trust.
Yeah.
So it's moving forward. But thanks for joining us. Until next time, when we talk more about this, may the Force be with you. Yeah, thank you. This has been The Way. It's been really fun. And I just want to add that Ray Stevenson, rest in peace, because huge part of Ahsoka. He was the Punisher in one version. He was a dedicated actor, and he was very passionate for Star Wars. He had such an aura on the live stage. And I think his character would have been a huge part of the Filoniverse going forward. So let's see what happens. Yeah, really looking forward to seeing him in Ahsoka, and truly sad that there will be no more beyond that. Of course. Okay, thank you guys. May the Force be with you.